Black lives matter.
Yes, period.
All lives matter.
Yes, period. My whole body matters to me. But if I cut my finger, I don't need to bandage my whole body.
Black lives matter shouldn't be criticized for provoking violence.
If you go back to the Boston Tea Party, when did change happen without things getting broken?
The idea of an achievement gap is racist.
Of course not.
Everybody has the right to a free MBA program.
Sure, why not? If we could find a way that wouldn't put the economy in a hole.
Can we separate the blacks and the whites?
Segregation wasn't all bad. I do like the idea of an overhaul. And there's a lot of oblivion. You have to justify your existence so much.
Do you think, Samantha, the victory of the civil rights movement is compatible with capitalism?
I guess in a short answer, no.
Are you optimistic about the future of this movement and the attainability of its goals?
I am. I think there's a chance that people will say, I don't want to repeat that. Oh, shoot, this is messed up.
Hello, everybody. Hello, my dear students, and hello, everybody who is watching this from the faculty team in the course named Equity and Opportunity at Hugsy. I'm recording this podcast today with Samantha Fletcher, who has kindly agreed to participate. She is my colleague from last year's cohort at Hugsy at the Graduate School of Education. Sam, welcome to the podcast. It's my first podcast, so I hope we will not be too terrible at doing that.
Sure, it'll be great.
And I will read a summary of some of your initiatives, Sam, if you don't mind. You are a Soul Science Fellow for your years of dedication to early childhood education. You were in the TIE program, that's where I am now. You were also an Equity and Inclusion Fellow, and you were planning to research innovative ways technology can impact diversity and inclusion efforts in education. You are an equity practitioner and racial dialogue facilitator. You also worked in the past as a journalist and producer for newspapers, magazines, and radio before transitioning to independent school. You served as an equity, diversity, and inclusion liaison, and you earned your master's degree in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis on minority, urban, and multicultural education from the University of Maryland. Is everything I said correct?
It is. It's accurate. Thank you.
Okay, right. So I hope everybody knows who you are, what background you have. I wanted to ask you a few questions in this podcast, which will outline my limits of knowledge, what I know and don't know. There is much more that I don't know in this field. And I think some part of this will be useful to my current students at a language school here in Russia, and maybe their friends.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a list of statements taken from Russian Google searches, like the most popular Google searches, on the topic of BLM, civil rights movement, and everything connected to equity. And some of these were taken from the readings that we did in the course on equity and opportunity. I would like you to just briefly answer whether you support this statement or you don't. Also, you may have anything in between, such as, okay, I support it with some qualifications. I need to make some statements about this. So you can choose whether to answer very briefly or add something. Okay, let's start here. Race is a social construct.
Yes.
Okay. In the United States, there is a system or systems of oppression used by the white majority to keep their benefits from domination, white privilege.
Yes. So the definition of racism that I go by is that racism is a system of advantages based on race. And while I don't think all white people see it that way, or white people see it as this oppressive thing against another group, there are all of these advantages that the white majority get to have that impact the way racism works. So I guess it's yes and. That I agree with that statement.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I realized not all people who are a part of the white majority understand that. While there are a number of white people who do understand that to be true.
All right. Let's move on to the next one. I have a few more. Black Lives Matter.
Yes, period.
Okay. All lives matter.
Yes, period. I'm going to make sure I clarify. The thing is, all lives do matter. So it didn't need to be said. When people said it, I felt like it was a great example of how racism works. And there's something about Black that gets people. When we said Black Lives Matter, originally, way back when this started, after the Trayvon Martin case, a lot of white people, maybe some Black people, assumed that they were saying white people's lives didn't matter. No one said that. Was people being a little sensitive and thinking, I need to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to bring myself into it. No one ever said their lives didn't matter. And one analogy I use is my whole body matters to me. But if I cut my finger, I'm going to put a Band-Aid on that to stop that bleeding, right? To stop, because that's where the problem is. I'm going to address it. Like at that moment, my finger matters. I need to take care of it.
Sure.
I don't need to bandage my whole body.
Okay. Defund the police.
Defund the police. So I took a course at the Kennedy School that was very eye-opening in terms of politics around it. But if you think of Ireland, police there don't even carry guns. And I'm sure there's other countries too where that happens. So the policing in the way that we have it could be changed at least. My counter for that was to refund the police. But then I realized, I was like, oh, wait, refund is a word that means give all the money back. I understood defund the police. I just know that it would take a lot of years. I think it would take a while for something like that to happen. But I don't think it's a bad idea to start putting the things in place that would lead to defunding the police. I think it's possible someday, but there needed to be more of a message around how do you think that this can happen?
Okay, so you're arguing for police reform, not immediate like defunding, right?
Yeah, I have a little hope. I don't have a lot of hope in police reform, but at least starting with reformation, but seriously starting with reforming. And my argument is for starting by taking away some of the duties that police have. So they don't need to respond to a mental health call, and they don't need to respond to something that's related to something nonviolent.
Yeah. The next one is tax the rich.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like when President Donald Trump would not show his taxes, and he wouldn't show them, he wouldn't show. And there are all these reports from people who had seen them or from wherever, like this guy is paying less taxes than somebody, a teacher, than like somebody who works at like a Starbucks. I don't know, like somebody with a very low level job is paying more in taxes than people who have a lot of wealth. They are taxed, but there's a lot of loopholes and reasons that they don't get taxes high, but it seems like it's helpful to the economy if they paid a little bit more. Yes, I'm for that.
Okay, so let's move on to a few most controversial ones. Black Lives Matter shouldn't be criticized for provoking violence.
It's not about provoking violence. It's about, let's bring awareness to the fact that so many people are killing us, like we actually want to live. Let's bring awareness to mothers having heartbreak. Let's bring awareness to children, nieces, nephews. Why can't I see my uncle anymore? Martin Luther said, and I need to Google this to be sure, but a riot is the voice of the voiceless or something like that.
So I think this statement that I copied from the Washington Post website, it was about protests last year. There were broken windows in shops, and business owners, they had to compensate for the outrage of the people over a rightful reason, the murder of a person. But still, there was some violence involved there.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. All right. No, I was just trying to explain what I think this is about.
But there's a whole thing. You had a contract. Like, I can live in this country. I can be free. You break the contract repeatedly. But you don't want to say, yeah, I support the cops and I support them surveilling you and killing you, essentially. I break that contract every time I violate you, but I won't speak on that. But if you break a window, then I'm going to say that you did something. The contract is constantly broken. So I just have a problem if the police aren't going to be called violent. If the majority who is perpetuating and supporting the violence is not going to be called violent. Violence was provoked for this is the response. And some of those people weren't even Black Lives Matter people. Again, yes, some things got broken. Yes. If you go back to the Boston Tea Party, when did change happen without things getting broken? Plus, further, there were that was like, what, 1 or 2%? If you look at the percentages of that paled in comparison to like all the peaceful protests that happened. So it was also really unfair for people to start pointing out those and not point out the white violence. And so who's really being violent? So you want to talk to me about a business or you want to talk to me about a life?
Okay. All right. To recap, you're saying that turning a blind eye to all the violence that happens on part of the whites while attracting attention to the 1% of cases where the blacks were violent or did something wrong is hypocrisy, right?
Yes.
Summarize. Okay.
And I will say it may not be 1%, but it was very low. Yes.
Okay. All right. Which brings us to the next statement. Yes. I reject a system that regards legality over morality. A quote from Agnes Lee.
I'm not familiar with that statement, but yeah, I can understand that. Legality matters, but morality matters too. So if they're both and they're equally weighted, it's one thing. If legality is over morality, I reject that.
Okay. Slowly approaching the field of education. The idea of an achievement gap is racist.
Of course not. It's not racist. It exists.
Okay.
For racial reasons, though. So I've been involved with an organization called Challenging Racism, which is where I got my racial dialogue facilitator training. And it was founded by a white woman who taught for about maybe 20, 30 years. And when she first started teaching, she noticed the achievement gap. And so she thought, what is happening here? What is this? So throughout her time, she looked at different factors: the person's religion, gender, LGBTQ status. She looked at all these different things and race across the board. Every time throughout her years, when she would see it, the biggest gap factor had to do with race. The problem there is that the majority of teachers in this country are white, heterosexual, Christian, middle class women. So that's where implicit bias comes in. They're not connecting with students. There's just cultural differences. Students are disciplined at a higher rate. They're spending time out of school. So the grades are dropping there because there's less time. Why can't these Black students catch up? Why can't these students of color catch up? We looked at it from the other perspective. What is it that the teachers aren't doing to connect culturally, to be inclusive, to understand that people different from them might learn in different ways or might need to hear different things? The standardized testing be different. So there's a lot that goes into it that I think people aren't looking at or considering. Maybe some people are, but it's definitely not racist to there's an achievement gap that exists.
Okay. The next quote is as follows: "My little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character."
So I bet I know who that quote is from.
Well, you can try to guess.
The great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He had that dream. And I would imagine his kids, or at least his grandkids, probably felt, if he could have lived to see, he probably would have felt like they were living some version of that. Because there are times, the fact that schools desegregated. Now I would argue that schools never integrated. There's a difference between integration and desegregation.
Mhm.
But the fact that schools desegregated and kids are playing with each other, especially at a preschool, elementary level, you're seeing kids of different races playing together. And there are some cases when kids do get the chance to be judged by their content and not the color. That's not a lot, I would say. As a diversity, equity, and inclusion leader and consultant, I'm talking to people about being able to live out that statement. And I have no idea when we would see such a thing. But of course, that's a goal. You like, judge me for what you know about me, not for the threat that you think you saw, not for what you think because of what you've heard, but who am I? What do you know? What do I bring to the table? So yeah, that statement would be wonderful. And it's lived out in some places, in some ways, at some times. But if it could always be true, that'd be wonderful.
All right. So everybody has the right to free general education.
Yes, I think everybody does have a right. Everybody should have a right. And I feel like because of the way the public school system is set up, they have a right to go to school. Hopefully they can get a really good education that's quality with teachers that are including content that often gets left out. But yes, everybody has a right. Yes.
Okay. Let's go further down the road. Everybody has the right to free university education.
I would love for that to be a reality, that people could go to a university for free. And I'm thinking of in the US context, like how that would be possible for everybody because of the way, we're set up in terms of having to pay for this and for that cost to cover this. If there were some model that's like how the public school is, where there's some tax-based thing, but I think it would be awesome if everybody could at least access universities.
Okay. Everybody has the right to a free PhD program.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now you are very confident.
I just want people to have the right to education as far as they can go with it.
Okay. Everybody has the right to a free MBA program.
Sure, why not?
Okay. All right. No problem with that. Okay.
If we could find a way that wouldn't put the economy in a hole.
Okay. That's an important qualification here. Okay. Sam, so far you're managing really well. Okay.
Oh, great.
We have a few more questions connected to the areas outlined by the course. What I'm going to do right now is just read out the small bits, the pieces that I prepared with my understanding, which comes from certainly my positionality as an international student and being almost through this course. I know some things and I don't know many others. So please forgive me if some of my statements are not yet quite there. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So what I know about slavery and race in the United States was that the blacks were not the original or first slaves. And the first slaves, the previous ones, were Irish and English lower class men. And they actually rebelled against slave owners since they already had civil rights back in England, where they had come from. And because they were the troublemakers, and also because they were in no way better than the blacks for the purposes of plantation owners, they were essentially let go. The white Englishmen and Irishmen were let go and offered to settle further to the west in previously uninhabited territories. And they themselves had a chance to become slave owners. So that was a sort of social lift of the time. And black slaves didn't stand any chance to become free or own a plantation or anything, since they were considered an inferior race by the law. And the law was introduced to justify the actions of plantation owners. And so the legislators at the time had to go great lengths to define race. And the sole purpose of defining race was to continue the oppression of the blacks. I know that was long, but at least that's my summary of what was happening at the time. Is that correct?
Partially.
Okay.
So this whole idea of this Irish, this is nonsense. This gets into the fake news. So there were some Irish people who were indentured servants. It's not the same as like chattel slavery, meaning like you're born into it, you never grow out of it. Indentured servants, probably no one wants to be either. Okay. Like, we can be clear on that. But an indentured servant is going to be this worker for a period of time. And that's it. You're not born into it. You don't have to dye it. You're not getting lynched, but it's very comfortable for people who don't know, for people who want to not believe that this country's history is as bad as it was. It's awful. So yes, Irish people, indentured servants. Okay. Was that cool? No. Was it the same as slavery? No. And so really, I personally refer to slavery as the centuries-long hostage crisis, where rape, torture, murder, and child and human trafficking could happen at will. And then you're hoping you have this child who you love and you just want to raise your children. And the next thing they're like, well, I'm just going to sell, your boy looks big now. And you're like, please don't take him away. And they don't care. They just sell the kid. And aside from that, imagine, okay, your family, your kids, your wife, somebody has held you hostage. Anytime you try to stand up and speak about I don't know, punch you in the head, a shoe, a brick, or whatever. And you're like, okay, you get it, and you finally get, I'm not going to leave. He can sleep with my wife when he wants to. They can do whatever to my kid. Imagine all that happens. And then one day they come and say, all right, you're free to go. And then you live on the same street with this person, and everybody else is related to that person or look like that person. And all of a sudden these free slaves are just supposed to trust. All right, you're saying I'm free, but I really got to watch my back and watch where I go and watch other, because none of you guys have had to pay for any of the crimes. So you really don't see it as crimes. So you don't value my life. You're saying that some law has said that you can't own me, but there's nothing to really stop you.
Okay. So essentially, the English and the Irish that came to the US, they were not exactly enslaved. So they had a different status. And then you shared a lot, Sam, how that previous status, like hostage crisis, how it has affected and is still affecting basically the standpoints of the races today. So they can't really trust each other. They have to deal with the consequences. No one has paid for their crimes of the past. There was no reflection that is necessary in such circumstances. If race is a social construct, usually aimed to promote oppression and white privilege, why do Black people seem to be fine identifying their own race?
There was a time when Black people were maybe kind of just looked down on themselves. Who am I? What do I have? Just downtrodden. But there's this whole movement of, we actually are great. We went through all this and we came out of it. We came through it. We survived. We're proud. We want to be proud of who we are. And it is a social construct. Like white America decided we'll make the white race. And there have been times through different decades where different people could be considered white. At one point, Irish couldn't be considered white. Then later they can be considered white. So what is that? It's an obvious construct. But it's, okay, you decided we're going to own that then. We're going to let you know. You call us Black, you're trying to be demeaning. We're Black and proud.
So this is a form of reflection and resistance.
Yeah, you could say that. I love how I can go on for 5 minutes and you're great. You're great at summarizing. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 year at Huxley. Okay, the next one. And this is a thing that keeps coming up in many conversations. So here in Russia, we watch American movies a lot. And in American movies, if you see two Black people talking to each other, they will use the N-word a lot. Okay, especially in very informal context. And this is a question for probably my students who don't know why they shouldn't use it. What I say is, this is a word that has a terrible history. It's like its reputation is worse than probably for any other word in the English language.
Yes.
And with this word, white people have historically murdered, sold,
Yes.
raped Black
Yes.
people. And this is why they can say it to each other, because this is their form of celebrating their own culture. And there's no power imbalance between them. But when white people say that, it's a terrible idea, because this is reminiscent of the past.
I think you hit the nail on the head with a few things. And I should say that's a controversial discussion if you have it with white and Black people together. I know Black people who definitely say it to each other. I know some who don't say it at all. So it can be a little bit polarizing. I get it. I understand. But to your point about, I remember Oprah, when her show was still on, she had a conversation with Jay-Z to have this exact thing, and they disagreed, and they were like, we'll agree to disagree. But Oprah's standpoint was exactly what you said. White people, slave owners, or just white people from way back would rape or lynch or hang or torture and say it. And so for Oprah, that word was probably the last word this Black person heard before they were killed. And she's like, that to me is not a word that I want to use. And Jay-Z was like, while I respect you and you're right to say that, to him, he's like, I'm taking the power out of it. You mean it for harm, and I will mean it as a term of endearment. Some people think that sounds ridiculous. They think it sounds silly, but it is. I also like what you said about taking out that power imbalance. Like, it's like, I've depowered this, and I use other words to refer to you also, but I'll use that one. But it's not something that Black people feel like white people should be able to say, because it's never coming out of a white mouth. It was only intended for harm. And it's not coming from each other. It's like, okay, that's what they call us. And they could probably jokingly call it to each other until it became just like this thing, this way of doing it. So it's one of these things that it's off limits. It's just not okay.
Okay. And a further clarification for my students, referring to a Black person as Black is fine.
Yeah, yes. I would say yes. You could always ask, is that okay? Because I know some people who prefer African American to Black, but then there's also people who are not African American that are in this country. Somebody might be from Trinidad or from Jamaica, and they're like, I'm actually not African American, but I'm Black. So it really depends. I would say for the most part, it's fine with me. But then in case they want to be called something else.
Sure. Yes, they might have their own preference. Okay, so we are back, and I'm trying to pitch a racist idea to Samantha.
Wow, alrighty. Let's see.
The idea is racist on the surface. I just want to know why this isn't being discussed, because despite its ugliness, it might develop into something that's actually beneficial to Black students. So we know from the famous decision from Brown versus the Board of Education, dated 1954, the court concluded that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. However, we also know that Black children live under stereotype threat. That's when there is a negative stereotype about the social group, and the person from this group is stressed out even more in a performance setting, because their failure also supports the stereotype. As we know from a different reading, Professor Omania Taylor writes that an identity develops in several stages, and essentially people need support in the form of content in their programs. Then the question is, can we separate the Blacks and the whites, but this time not to oppress the Blacks, but give the Blacks the best teachers, the highest salaries, and zero risk of stereotype threat if their teachers are also Black, to ensure better outcomes by letting them form identities in their own stride and then admit them to universities as already fully fledged individuals?
So I guess a couple of things. It kind of sounds a little bit like why HBCUs were invented, historically Black colleges and universities. But also, I went to school that had multiple races. So what I was taught was that segregation was awful. It's an awful thing. You learn about they used to keep everything separate, and you think it's so bad. And then when I was a journalist, I was covering a story in Augusta, Georgia, with this group of people that went to the school called Laney High School. And every 4 years, they did what's called a super reunion. And then I found out it was the people who went to that school before desegregation was mandated. And this group of Black people who all still were coming together every 4 years. There was a strong bond and connection that they had. So many of those people went on to become doctors, lawyers, working for NASA, like all of these really respected, high earning professions. So anyway, when I was doing the story, I when I was digging and finding out, there's this woman and she pulls me aside. Samantha, the segregation wasn't all bad. Mm-hmm. And I was just, it was mind blowing. It was like open up this part of my brain that I didn't even know was there. And I was just thinking, wait, it wasn't? There was a time when, before Brown versus Board, mm-hmm. when true, the schools, the books, the supplies, all of that was secondhand. But one could argue that's still the case, even with desegregation. Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint, yes. But from the standpoint of desegregating just so that the races could be together, if they weren't ready to actually treat Black people with respect and dignity, it wasn't for the best. And so I say that desegregation and integration aren't the same thing. Desegregation happened, they weren't segregated, but the integration, if integration had happened, then some white people would have actually went to the Black schools too. And it wouldn't just be the other way around. And mm-hmm. So anyway, because as a result of Brown versus Board, yes, desegregation happened, but some of the really powerfully sad, unfortunate, bad parts of that were thousands of Black teachers who got displaced because they would close the Black schools. They would make people with PhDs become desk workers, janitors, mm-hmm. Assistants. There's some bad parts, but prior to that, there were some really thriving communities and thriving schools. So I think what you're asking is if it would be good to have something like that again. Is that?
Yeah, something like that again, but centering Black students, Black children, yeah, and giving them the best resources and trying to mitigate or remove stereotype threat, like doing all of this for them specifically, because historically they have been so badly harmed by the existing system of education. So why not do it why not do an overhaul of the whole system and center them?
I agree that could be nice. I think the arguments that people would say is you're trying to resegregate. I
know how it looks, yeah.
But it's like affinity groups, which mm-hmm. are just groups of people getting together around a thing. And when you'd have a Black student affinity group at a school, because some schools are having them, a lot of principals and head schools are hesitant. How do I explain? People will say, how can you just have a Black student mm-hmm. group meet? What is this? Is this fair? What about white students? They'll be like, why can't we go? Why can't we be in there? And my response is, you do realize that when the administrators meet, that's an affinity group. It's mm-hmm. a meeting of administrators, because sometimes it makes sense to come together around a certain purpose to serve a certain thing. Like when a soccer team meets, that's an affinity mm-hmm. group of soccer players. It doesn't mean they don't like football players or basketball mm-hmm. players. It just means a basketball player can't just come to a soccer practice. And so that's why I feel like a tricky, like a kind of a powerful, slick tool is when you get a group of people together, mm-hmm. especially when it's a group of Black people, and they're like, oh, you can't do that because that looks bad. Well, does it? Because we have some common issues that we need to address. And I think you could, and I think it doesn't mean that you're never going to be around white people or Hispanic people or Asian people. You will, but I agree with this overhaul. Who knows, without the stereotype threat, without the cross-cultural communication challenges, without the disproportionate discipline. And yes, there probably will be some students who have some needs or behavior challenges or whatever. But for the most part, I do like the idea of an overhaul and like giving this group a chance that wasn't given, like other mm-hmm. than when they had to go and create it themselves, but like giving it a chance where somebody else foots the bill and funds it. I like the idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That brings us to the next question about model minorities. Several Asian minorities, such as the Chinese, the Japanese, and Koreans, they are considered the model minority, unlike several others from Asia, for example, Cambodians. In light of what you previously said, is it only because the mentioned social groups comply with the rules of the white majority and use their own academic skills and aptitudes to excel in this society? Is that why they are considered model minorities?
That certainly plays into a part of it. Those considered the model minority now were like not welcome here. Like they weren't always, it wasn't always that way. But there also came a time when rather than have the minority groups, Black groups, Asian groups, and all these people get together, it was like this intentional thing, have infighting, so to speak. So it's, what are they offering? What are they contributing? Because a lot of the groups that you named, or from my experience with the people from those groups that I know, will tell you that their families didn't want them to assimilate. And a number of them did not want to do the fighting, the fussing, the protesting, and the arguing, whereas some would. And then government officials or higher, like powers that be would be like, be more like this group. Look what this group is doing, and look what, and so put them on this pedestal where it started to be accepted as the norm that, oh, okay, those groups are going to be good at these things, and they're going to be the model minority, and the other groups should live up to that. But I think a lot of it has to do with this desire to keep groups separate. And again, I can send you that information that I'm talking about. But also, I think some of it would have to do with this group that was willing to assimilate. I was just at a training yesterday where it's a Chinese woman there that was talking to me about some stuff, and we were talking about names, and she was sharing that her father, her grandfather, when they came over, completely changed their names to sound more like white American names. The goal was to make life a lot more easy by assimilating. And I'd argue that's a lot of assimilation to the point where you changed what you're called. That's a lot, but I do think that probably has something to do with what you said.
Okay, so you touched on 3 subtopics, shall I say that? Like they were and are compliant, they are ready and willing to assimilate, and maybe somebody was trying to pit one social group against the others and like show, okay, look at them, they are the example, right? Follow the example.
Yes, but I will add that not all were compliant, but there was this generalization that they would be more willing to be compliant. And not all of them were, but some of them felt, okay, this makes my life easier.
All right. Which brings us to the final question in the part named self/practice, Sam. So in many places on the internet, I see white people expressing white guilt and sharing how guilty they feel about perpetuating an oppressive system of white privilege. In your opinion, how constructive is this position? And maybe there is something that they could do instead to actually promote equity.
Yeah, white guilt is tricky because I feel like there's levels of it. Initially, years and years ago, when I started, I'm like, I think white people are aware of their privileges and are aware of the ways that they have more access than Black people do, and the ways that they contribute to hardships that Black people or other people of color face. But as I started doing the work, I was like, there's a lot of oblivion. I changed it from they're all aware to a lot of white people I would discover have been in this own world where they hadn't learned a lot about other cultures. They really thought that everybody was living the same life they're living. So if people are getting arrested, oh, it's their fault. They must have done something wrong because they hadn't even considered that people are not having the same experiences. And then they learn and they'd be like, oh, wow, this is different. People are racially profiled. There are these things happening to people that are just not fair, and they're not happening to me. And so once their eyes are first open to see that these things are different, then there's these levels, then some guilt can start. And if they keep going through the process, if they push past the guilt to be like, oh shoot, this is messed up. Okay, what can I do to help? What is my role? Then that's where you get to a helpful place. The tricky part is when either you're stuck in the guilt or you're just like, woe is me. And then the tears, like if you're in a space and you start crying, I've seen an article that said, is white guilt just another form of white privilege? Because if you cry and it shuts down the whole conversation and brings the attention to just this person that's crying, then you're like, wait a minute, you've taken up the space again. So that's not helpful. So I think that what can be done instead is, it's like, all right, white person could recognize that they are a part of this system and all these systemic things. They do get a lot of privileges that people of color don't get. Recognize, like, oh man, I'm a part of it. I am not actively putting myself in a place and saying, I don't want you to do this or you can't do this, but I'm a part of the system of people that causes that. And then just starting to be like, okay, what do I need to know to help undo that system? Like, being stuck in the guilt gets you nowhere. I think do the work, educate yourself, and white people don't know what to read, I don't know what to do, but they can start there. Read books by Black authors, read books on this work, watch movies that are not just on this work, but have predominantly Black casts, and learn some things about other cultures, or be in places where they're the minority. So if you're the minority, you're going to learn from other cultures that are around you, learn about people other than who you are, and then figure out, oh, poor Black people, let me go give you some money. That's not it. But it's more like, oh, let me write to my neighborhood person that's calling for more police to patrol the area because they've seen Black teenagers who are just walking home from school. Let me go to this meeting and say, that's not what we need. This is gonna negatively impact this group. Or writing to a politician, or being there to speak out, or if some Black person is being followed in a store, like racially profiled, saying to the cashier or the person following them, why are you doing that? Like, interrupting it when it happens is a way to get past the guilt. I feel like it shows that you actually have some feelings inside. You're like, whoa, this is the messed up stuff. I feel like I get that it's messed up, but then like, all right, I got this privilege. Now, what can I do with it to help create opportunities for somebody else?
All right. So your advice is to step in when you see white privilege being exercised.
Yeah. One whole thing that I feel like I'll write a book about it someday is time, the amount of time that is lost justifying your existence. Black people getting pulled over, getting questioned. There was a whole thing at Starbucks that time when the two Black men were in the Starbucks in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and they arrested them. They were like, we're here waiting on a friend. And they're like, why are you sitting here? And people sit in Starbucks all the time. They end up arresting and go to jail. So there's this whole talk about race. My perspective was, did they need to pick up their kids from school that day? Did they have a doctor appointment? So much wasted time because you have to justify your existence so much. So interrupt that kind of stuff. So we don't have to have our time wasted while everybody else gets to go on. A lot of white people aren't experiencing those things. They aren't just getting pulled over. They aren't just getting questioned for being somewhere. They aren't just being followed. They don't just have to stop and answer and justify and show identification. It's that thing. Use your privilege to speak up.
Okay. All right. You gave an interesting example of white privilege not paying the tax on Blackness, right? Because every time you get pulled over, you're paying a tax on being Black, except it's in the form of time, not in the form of money. But
yes.
The second part is more about you, because you are an activist and to a large extent a visionary in this field, so you can see the future of where this should be going. So I'm not sure I could be of any help in terms of the future of equity in the United States. I know that the civil rights movement, the movement for the rights of Black people in the United States, a lot of the literature here around this is connected to very socialist ideas. the equality of income and equity in outcomes. And I'm asking you here, do you think, Samantha, the victory of the civil rights movement is compatible with capitalism?
I guess in a short answer, no. That one's hard for me. I feel like I'm not enough of an economist to really speak to that. Because a capitalist society, it works really well for some people, but it feels like it doesn't work well for the majority. But there are people who would argue that it's the kind of society you need. I do think that the socialist kinds of things where this is free for all, or this income is more equal, it sounds good, but I just don't know if it could work, because I've only known capitalism to work, and I don't think capitalism actually works very well, but this is the one that I know. It could be gains if people were on a better level playing field. It seems like it's good. I just don't know what would happen to the economy, but it sounds good, and it sounds ideal, and it sounds aspirational. But what does that do to the economy ultimately? I don't know. But it seems like we've only done capitalism, so why not give it a try to see what could happen?
I know for sure that countries where there is less inequality in income, they are happier countries. So that's one good goal to strive for, I think. So
there's got to be less competition, like the Kardashian family, who people would say they're rich and famous for nothing, meaning not like a hardworking, typical job thing, but it's more about the beauty and this and that. And then so many people wanted to aspire to do that. The internet and social media took off, and all these young girls were like, I can try to do that. And I imagine if the income was more even, you'd have less of that too, with this, let me starve myself or do all these bodily changes to try to be rich, or whatever people do to try to earn more. But I like to hear that they're happier countries.
Yeah, that's for sure. We have a Russian economist named Sergei Guriev. I actually will share a link in the YouTube video. He points to research where it's confirmed that countries are happier if there is less inequality. Summary. We arrived exactly at the point that I had that we would arrive. And I have a summary that I want to use to recap basically what we were talking about and the course. Okay. So the way I understand equity, work, and activism now could be this story. And correct me if I'm wrong somewhere. Okay. Because I may well be wrong somewhere. So there was an act of terrorism in your house. The terrorists took many people hostage and forced them into the basement, where they were made to work in a sweatshop of sorts. They adopted house rules that explained why this was the right thing to do. The sweatshop worked by day, and by night the terrorists went down to the basement, killed some of the hostages, and raped others, and sold some of the hostages' children as a commodity. Then one day there was a feud among the terrorists over what to do with the hostages. In the end, they decided to release them, but the issue was that the terrorists still lived on all of the other floors of the building and were reluctant, to say the least, to let the hostages use the stairs or the elevator. So they were mostly limited to the same old basement. This is why the hostages decided to fight and dismantle the stairwell, remove the elevator, and essentially destroy the big building. Let's call it the Empire State Building. And instead build a lot of similar single-story houses all over the place to be inhabited by the terrorists and the hostages alike in the hope of building trust later. Is that a summary that you would approve of? Or there are major corrections? Revise and resubmit, maybe.
No, this is the history up to now. That summary is like the history of the country.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that works.
Oh, okay.
Because I feel like it leaves enough to be thought about. Dismantling, I guess the only thing I'm thinking extra is like the education system in this country started because of Black people. once slavery was over, they started forming in these churches. They were educating themselves, and they were getting smarter than poor white people. And they're like, we can't have this. And so they make these strides, and then the hostage owners would come back, like in your thing with the houses. Maybe they burn a couple of theirs down. So you have to keep starting. You have to keep restarting. So I feel like in the hopes that there's trust, but then later there would be some law, some voting restrictions, always something that would come to be like a slap in the face of the progress made.
Okay. To wrap it up, Sam, I want to ask you the final question. Are you optimistic about the future of this movement and the attainability of its goals?
I am, because very often I'm not. And then I'll talk to somebody. There's a great man who I interviewed on one of my podcasts, the Reverend Otis Moss. I called him when I was really down. I think it was after Breonna Taylor, or it was after something that was just very hard when I was starting Harvard. Nobody's going to be held accountable. It hurt so bad. And I was like, I just feel like giving up sometimes. And he's like, I don't. So many of the people that were super closest to fighting the integration of schools and all that stuff, this is their last push. They're very old. I don't think they're the majority. And I do think a lot of people are dinosaurs with this old way of thinking. A theory that I have is that schools are doing a lot to contribute to the racism, the way people are viewing each other, because everybody goes to school. Like, everybody has to go to some sort of school. But it seems that when we're not at school, there's this thought that there's this hierarchy, and one group is better than the other, or more deserving than the other. One group deserves to be followed. And I argue that it has to do with something with the way that we're teaching. We're not teaching people to do those things, but we're behaving in ways that students can pick up that one group is different. And now that we are starting to actually tell the truth and be intentional to what's being taught in schools is the truth about history, to the like actual hostage situation, as I framed it, as you did. And if these younger generations, the current and younger, keep hearing, oh, this is what happened. So once these white kids, Black kids, all these different people, teenagers and the younger people, as long as they start learning those things, to not think, oh, I'm white, I'm bad, but to more think, wait, what? That's what they did a long time ago? I don't want to be like the people. I don't want to make those same kind of decisions. I don't want people to hurt. As long as we're able to get the actual kinds of stories told that need to be told, I think there's a chance that people will say, I don't want to repeat that. And there may be a sliver of hope for some better days ahead. I can't necessarily say I see them, but I have some hope that they'll be coming.
Well, let's hope there is a silver lining to this. Sam, thank you very much for coming to my podcast. And
thanks for having me for your first episode.